Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next podcast. And today's podcast is called From Vision to Reality, Areiel Wolanow's Path in FinTech Leadership. Hello, Areiel. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you, Tim?
Fantastic, fantastic. So first question, can you share your career journey that led you to become the Managing Director of FinServ Experts and a leader in leveraging emerging technologies for business transformations?
My career journey is long and littered with mistakes. I started work in 1988 after getting my master's in finance at Cornell, and first job was with Andersen Consulting, what is now Accenture. Worked through the 90s, through the heart of the dot-com boom in Silicon Valley. Saw many amazing things, many silly things, and some glorious successes. As one example, during my time at Silicon Graphics, they hired the Rolling Stones to play our company picnic. I saw appalling amounts of money get spent for minimal gain. That was instructive. Moved to Singapore in 2000. Started the global EAI competency for Siebel Systems. Then in 2002, Siebel imploded, was acquired by Oracle. The dot-com bust hit, and I moved to England. Worked as a freelancer for a little while, did some work with ThoughtWorks, joined IBM in 2004, and was with them for 12 years. IBM has a lot of strengths, a lot of weaknesses, but for me, working for them was a blessing. I started as a project manager, began to lead larger and larger programs, eventually leading programs of 100 plus people. Got to work all over the world, spent a year in Beijing, a year in Bangalore, a year in Warsaw, Mexico City, Copenhagen, etc. And then joined the global banking competency. Then really things kicked into high gear, I would say in 2012, when I had the chance to lead a small team working on a financial inclusion project in southern China for IBM's Corporate Service Corps, which is their ESG program, doing a little bit of give backs. We were working on financial inclusion projects. And I think, as with many people, you reach a point in your career where you're successful enough that you want to focus more exclusively on the impact you're making.
Sure.
And that was that moment for me. I think all of us have had that moment at some point in our careers. But for me, that was it. It's also where I first met the woman who eventually would become my co-director at FinServ Experts, Kafira Khan. But from that point on, I focused almost exclusively on projects that were, impactful by my definition. My next major role was actually getting the chance to start a consulting practice from scratch for IBM, which was in Kenya. I was sent down there with the instruction to launch a financial services consulting practice for East Africa. My remit was to grow the business from 0 to 5 million in 2 years, hire a local leader to replace me, and then move on. And in that role, I took on the project that I think has more or less, not only made my career at IBM, but more or less defined, was really the starting point for defining my brand independently. I had the distinct privilege and opportunity to lead the team that used AI to build the credit scoring engine for a set of individual and SME loans delivered over the M-Pesa mobile platform, which most of you will know is the most penetrated mobile platform in the world. It's Kenya's mobile money system. Over 40% of the Kenyan GDP flows through it. So that project really changed my career. It got me promoted to executive at IBM, got me an invitation to address the G20, and it allowed me to do, to have a lot of say in terms of what I did next. So the next thing I did was start another consulting practice for IBM. In this case, the blockchain practice for the ASEAN region in Southeast Asia, working out of Singapore and Jakarta. In that role, I had the opportunity to sell and then deliver IBM's very first blockchain project, which was letter of credit origination for HSBC and Bank of America, underwritten by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is Singapore's central bank and financial regulator. Then in 2016, I took stock and said, okay, so I've now built 2 consulting practices for IBM. What would happen if I built my own? So that's what I did. So I left IBM and I started FinServ Experts, which is the consultancy I still lead now in 2024, some 8 years later. And the founding principle really was based on my observations in my long career. I would see, one emerging technology, with amazing capabilities come after the next, internet, mobile phones, robotics, AI, IoT, blockchain. And I saw the same thing happening again and again, which is companies would spend tens of millions of dollars implementing these technologies, use them to re-engineer their existing business model, and be surprised that these millions of dollars never delivered any value on the investment. So when I started FinServ Experts, I started with the principle that what we're really doing is implementing new business models based on emerging technology, business models that wouldn't be possible without the emerging technology. So if somebody comes to me, and they do, and say, I want to do blockchain, I want to do AI, I'll usually refer them to, colleagues, people who are good, who I trust, and who are less, quite frankly, who are less expensive, to help them out, because we are a technology consultancy, but we are working on implementing new business models, for small startups, for established enterprises. We're fortunate to have, A-list clients, the likes of Deutsche Telekom, Lloyd's of London, ICBC, and, on our client list. But we also work with small startups, the likes of Block Solutions, Finexos, SEGreen. So really, that's how we got to where we are now. We've, so our work is partially doing solution delivery and partially doing advisory work. I'm an advisor to UK Parliament on blockchain and AI. Do some lecturing for some universities like Cambridge and Zhejiang, and we are fortunate enough to number a couple of central banks, including Thailand and Saudi Arabia, amongst our clients.
Fantastic. That's very impressive. So, what inspired the development of patented, award-winning technology solutions under your leadership?
So that's a line from my LinkedIn profile. I recognize it, and I should, in fairness, point out that the patent I received was for a technology that was a commercial failure, but it's an instructive story. This was right at the start of the COVID pandemic, and we were looking at, at that point, what we had been focusing on, myself, Chris Justice, who's another member of our firm, and a few other people, was we were looking at, how to harmonize anti-money laundering and KYC AML onboarding for banks in a way that would preserve somebody's data privacy. So how to assert your identity without having to share all of the actual data. And the tech and the use case and the thinking around it actually started from a program for the city of Vancouver in Canada about IDing people letting into bars. And I promise this is relevant. But they had a big problem and a scandal that young, attractive women were flashing their IDs, getting into bars.
Right.
And this small group of bar bouncers, door people at bars, were taking their details and stalking them.
Hey, yes.
So they came up with a solution which was really interesting. It was a mobile app where you would basically, bump, NFC bump, and what you would get back is not, not the name or identifying details, but just a yes, no. Can you let this person into the bar?
That's fascinating.
So it's similar to ZKP, zero knowledge proofs. Those that actually has zero knowledge proof is a specific stochastic method which we weren't using, but the basic idea is the same, which is to query and just have the question back answered back. Can you do this or not? So what we did, is we took the ideas that we were having around KYC and ML and applied them to COVID. And what we came up with was a health passport where you would have a result, a COVID test, proof of a vaccine, etc. You would get it independently attested by somebody who has the regulatory and qualification to do that attestation. Then when you wanted to get on a plane, enter a sporting venue, have dinner at a restaurant, go to work, the person would basically, again, do an NFC bump with the app.
Sure.
Look at the photo, make sure it's actually you. And then you would basically test a series of assertions. And those assertions, if you remember during COVID, the rules about what you could do changed week by week. So you kept those assertions up to date. But whatever the assertions were, they would test again, they would test those assertions against the data that you had independently attested and verified. And the person doing the attestation would go, yes, no, let them in, don't let them in, without having to share any actual evidence, documents, any of your very private and sensitive health data. Now, we thought this was a no-brainer because everybody was saying that they wanted to preserve people's privacy. So we built this. As I said, we applied for the patent. We actually were the only COVID health management solution to win the coveted ID 2020 certification, saying, yes, this is independently tested to be self-sovereign. Turns out that all lip service aside, people didn't want to buy a solution where they didn't get that data. The governments wanted the data, the companies wanted the data. They said they wanted to protect people's privacy, but when it came down to it, they didn't. And commercially, no smoke and mirrors. It went nowhere.
Okay, got it completely. Thank you. So how has advising central banks and legislatures on technology adoption shaped your views on the future of finance?
Yeah, I have a somewhat contrarian view of regulators, or at least good ones, in the sense that I think they're great. Regulators, when they do their job well, are heroes because they remove uncertainty and they unlock investment. So I think regulators have an absolutely critical role to play and are one of the key critical success factors for giving one country's market a competitive advantage over another. And I think the best one of the best examples of that is here in the UK with the FCA. Now, it is easy to complain about the FCA moving slowly and the problems they have, and and the lack of clarity, particularly in the crypto area. Despite the fact that they were one of the first to come out. But the reality is, the UK, if you look at the size, the number of people, punches way above its weight in terms of its influence in the world in financial services. It is one of it is one of, if not the financial service center in the world, and that is largely due to the to the proactive nature of the FCA's embracement of regulation and technology. Is it everything it could be? No. Are there 10 things I'd want to change? Sure. But the reality is the FCA is a huge enabler of Britain's success in financial services.
Okay, fantastic. So in what ways has guest lecturing in universities like Cambridge influenced your approach in fintech and blockchain education?
I think anyone who has lectured for a living will attest to this. Probably the biggest thing is how it's impacted my own education. I'm reasonably certain when I lecture that I learn more from my students than they learn from me. Um, and so no, I have learned huge amounts. And obviously, when you're talking about an organization with the prestige of Cambridge or Zhejiang University in China,
Yeah,
which occupies a similar, for those who don't know,
yeah,
it occupies a similar tranche in China as Cambridge does in the UK. The students that you're interacting with are themselves global thought leaders and world shapers. So I jump at the chance when I get opportunities like this, because it
sure.
is the so I have learned more. I have become aware of more solutions. I have found flaws in my thinking from these engagements. So they are huge learning opportunities. And to anyone who's listening, who gets the chance, even if you're talking at a local community college level, do it. It will change
Yeah,
your life.
completely. So could you discuss your approach to integrating AI and ethical considerations in projects like Google's AI risk training?
So yeah, so Google, um, Google hired us and me specifically to build a AI risk training module for their go-to-market team, specifically in the public sector. And Google doesn't need help with AI. They've got the best AI people in the world, and they
Sure.
certainly don't need my help. But the problem they were having is that they were going out and they were telling their story, and they needed um, you know they needed a way to address the fears that people were having. And the problem, it's a problem, it's an opportunity, and it's also just fascinating. The the fears that people have about AI. Will it take my job? Will I, do I have any personal liability using it? Is it biased? Will it hurt people? Um, these fears are irreducible, and they attach to any new technology. So think about, will I lose my job? Is it safe to use? Am I personally exposed? Just think about those basic questions.
Sure.
Go back, and I did this, and I've done the research. If you go back and look in the 1880s and 1890s, one of the biggest technological changes, revolutions of that era was that the world's global logistics network sail was being replaced by steam as the main technology driving logistics. And if you look at newspaper headlines, what people are writing, they were asking the exact same questions. Is it safe? Am I going to lose my job?
Yeah.
Am I personally liable? So
Hmm.
these fears, they're irreducible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they're applying, them to AI correctly. I'm not saying the fears are unfounded. They are, they're very well founded,
Sure.
but they are irreducible. Now the good news is, because this is not our first rodeo, and because we, as as a society, have been through this before, there are actually very, very good techniques, very well developed, proven, established techniques um, for managing risk, for identifying, quantifying, mitigating risks. Um, they're not new. And the methodologies that are currently being used were really developed and honed in the 1950s and 1960s.
Mm.
Unfortunately, um, they're boring. They're not exciting. They're not exciting like AI or blockchain or IoT. And by and large, they're not taught in universities that much anymore. So
Mm.
you've got this, new generation of innovators in AI and other emerging technologies, bewilderingly smart, far smarter than you or I. And they don't know these techniques. It's not that they can't know them. It's not that they're unknowable. It's not that they're incapable. As I said, they're, in my opinion, they're smarter than us, but they don't know them.
Sure.
So really, it's about taking some very old tech risk management techniques and applying them to this new domain. And it's knowing, having enough skill with AI to be able to think sensibly about how to do that. Now, we'd been doing that, already before Google engaged us, which is why they engaged us. We worked with CMS, which is the 5th largest law firm in the world, to help them define, an AI risk assessment service offering. Now, once again, CMS does not need our help in tech law. They are some of the best tech lawyers in the world.
Sure.
I have the privilege of knowing and working with Charlie Kerrigan, who actually runs their blockchain and crypto practice. These are very, very smart, capable people, and unlike many lawyers, they get the tech. What they didn't know how to do, again, is to apply it and to use risk management methods, to look beyond the legal exposures and say, what are the technical shortfalls that will lead to the legal exposures? Okay,
sure.
They understand that AI can be biased. How do you determine whether a specific AI is biased? Well, you have to dig into the tech to do that. And the thing, and just a brief diversion. The thing about AI bias that's is that you have being ethical and being high-minded in your algorithm design, necessary but not good enough. When we did the M-Pesa project in Kenya, for instance, in Kenya, the big problem with bias was not so much racism as tribalism, but still very serious. So what we did all of the sensible things. We did not use your last name. We did not use your location. Wasn't that these weren't good predictors. We just didn't use them because it would lead to a biased model. So we thought, okay, we're in the clear. And by the second or third training, iteration, the model had picked up a tribal bias, which bewildered us. But we dug into the data, and we eventually traced down the culprit. And I swear to God, I am not making this up. There was a preference for a certain brand of beer that turned out to have a link to, it was a statistically significant predictor probability of default in a loan. Who knew? Turns out that this one brand of beer had a tribal affinity. There's one tribe that liked to drink this beer.
All right.
So we had to take it out of the model, which we were happy to do. But so the lesson there is that it's not enough to just be ethical. You have to be proactive. You have to constantly monitor, because bias will find all sorts of ways to get into your model, and you have to go through regularly, quarterly is what we decided, and make sure that doesn't happen. You have to be vigilant. All right, I've over-answered the question.
Thank you so much. That was really good. That was very fascinating. So, what were the key challenges and outcomes of leading high-profile projects such as blockchain ecosystem for Deutsche Telekom and Lloyd's of London's trade settlement prototype?
Challenge. So I think the biggest problems with leading, there's several problems actually. The association with crypto is certainly a problem. Crypto was the use case for which blockchain was invented, but not the use case for which we used it. And again, I'm fond of looking for historical precedents, as you've already seen.
Yes.
If you think about the invention of writing, which happened about 8,000 years ago, writing was invented for one use case, which was accounting. The first cuneiform tablets were all ledgers. And it wasn't for another 1,000 years until somebody said, hey, we could use this for laws, for religion, for literature, for music, for all the other things we write down now for history. But it was invented for one use case. Blockchain's like that. It was invented for crypto, no question.
Yeah.
But it has many, many use cases beyond it.
Exactly.
And helping people understand that gap. That was a challenge. I think the bigger challenge is really understanding where the value comes from.
Mm.
From blockchain, and the value comes mostly from reducing reconciliation. Both the trade finance for HSBC and Bank of America and the Lloyd's project had this same had this same driver. So if you think about a trade finance deal, you got a letter of credit. Who are the parties who need to agree? You have the buyer, the seller, the buyer's bank, the seller's bank, the freight forwarder, the logistics firm from the seller's factory to the port, from the port, the shipping, and you have the customs agent, you have the port authority. So you have all these parties. Each of them maintain their own systems, and somehow they have to keep them in all sync. And even if one tiny thing is out of sync, that product is held in customs for months,
Wow.
forever.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so anyone who's lived as an expat has either heard or known friends who have been in customs hell when their personal effects are stuck.
Sure.
And that's minor when you talk about a shipload of medicine or airplane parts.
Completely.
It's if that gets stuck in customs, you're talking about not only millions of dollars of loss, but significant disruption to people's lives.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the result of which is the companies involved in a trade finance trading network spend usually multiples more money keeping their records in sync than they do in their primary value creation, buying,
Sure.
selling the goods.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, and that's a travesty. Lloyd's of London, the same thing. So you've got 400 insurance firms buying and selling insurance on a trading floor, and they're spending 130 million pounds a year just keeping their, running a bureau to keep the records of those trades reconciled.
Mm.
So imagine a world where everybody agrees that they are going to keep one version of the truth. Now that's been possible technically since say the late 1980s, early 1990s, but it hasn't happened because it requires a central data owner.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and when it does, that becomes very powerful. Visa, MasterCard, Swift, these are all co-ops that
Yeah.
started when people made that decision. But that's not a decision that's easy to make, and and you end up losing a lot of power. Look at the power Swift has over the global financial network. People don't want to give up that power
No.
for
No.
obvious reasons. So it is not the decision to create a central data provider is stops that sort of centralization happening. And that but technology has now gotten to the point where you don't need that centralization to make it happen. Blockchain is in essence Dropbox for ledgers. You write a ledger, you write a ledger entry, a transaction on your ledger, and it gets synced with everybody else's ledger. But it's still everybody else's ledger. Each person owns their own, their own node, their own copy of the ledger.
Exactly.
So there's no loss of data, there's no loss of control, and there's no master central overlord who now has all the power over your data. That is that's the amazing promise. Our cost case, which was signed off and approved by the COO at Lloyd's, showed that we'd be able to reduce their operating costs of their bureau by 82%.
Wow.
By doing this. So that's
Definitely.
the promise.
Definitely. Thank you. So could you describe the conception and impact of SEGreen's food security provenance platform on a sustainable agriculture?
I can describe its potential. I can't, the impact hasn't happened yet, to be honest.
Yes.
We built it, it's being used, and prototyped, but it's still too early to say
Sure.
what the global impact
Potential
will be.
probably.
Yeah, it is. But the vision, if you will, and this is, we built this for sustainably grown seaweed in Indonesia, but there's nothing specific about seaweed to the solution. You've actually seen a demo of it, Tim, so you know this.
Yeah.
But the basic idea is that you have, and this is true throughout agriculture, mariculture, throughout the world, you have an upstream problem, which is that primary value creators, the farmers, are usually horribly exploited, and a downstream problem, which is that the large companies that are consumers, food companies, cosmetic companies, agricultural companies, have very, very limited ability into their supply chain. So now we are hardly the first people to try and solve that problem. You will look and you will see dozens, if not hundreds, of track and trace solutions being offered around the world. A lot of them using blockchain, though not all of them.
Yeah.
And by and large, they haven't been successful for the simple reason that the primary value creators are not given any incentive to use it. They're being asked to collect a lot of extra data or to use very expensive IoT devices or satellite feeds to collect data that nobody's compensating them for. They're not benefiting from, and in many cases, are not told how to use. So it's hardly surprising that most of these efforts have failed. What we tried to do with SEGreen was fix that, that broken link between the data needs of the downstream and the benefit of the upstream, and we did that in two ways. One was by making it not just a track and trace system, but a point of sale system, an actual e-commerce platform. So the benefit that the farmer gets from using is they get paid, and it implements, in the case of SEGreen, a consignment model, so that the farmer will get a predetermined percentage advance up front, but that advance, importantly, is not a loan. It cannot be used to force the farmer into debt slavery. It's a consignment fee.
Exactly.
And if the intermediary who picks up the seaweed fails to sell it, the farmer still keeps their consignment fee.
That's it.
When the intermediary does sell it on, the farmer gets their cut, and it's taken automatically from the point of onward sale. So the intermediary can't cheat the farmer. However, the intermediary benefits too. So it's important to ask, why would the intermediary have an incentive to give up their exploitive relationship? Well, because this cuts a huge step. They do not have to go back and find the farmer in a casual labor market. That's not a small thing.
No.
So the amount of effort they save is worth giving up the exploitive relationship. So it really does work for each party. So anyway, so that's one. The other benefit is that it allows for a attribute specific sourcing strategy, which means that I can decide that I'm going to get a certain attribute, like the temperature of the water or the salinity of the water, from an IoT device that's in the water. I'm going to get another attribute from a satellite feed, like the state of growth, which you can do by spectral analysis. Some things I can only get from the farmer, so I'll get those from the farmer. So you can define the sourcing strategy that reflects the capabilities and the technologies you have, and it's going to be different from one farm to the next, one country to the next. So providing that flexibility in the sourcing strategy, again, is one thing we didn't see out there, and we did on the platform. And we think that these things are going to make the difference.
Cool. Thank you so much. So reflecting on your advisory role for financial inclusion policies, how do you see AI enhancing inclusivity in financial services?
So fundamentally transforming is the answer. So in Kenya, between the time, from the time they rolled out the ability to take out these loans over M-Pesa to and looking forward to 5 years, the GDP per capita of the country grew by almost 50%. And there's some research that was done in a neighboring country, Tanzania, that suggests that much of that growth comes from SME job creation. The study in Tanzania looked at single-person businesses that grew and succeeded, and they arbitrarily defined success for this study, and it was a longitudinal study over 2.5 years, they define success as growing from a one-person company. Company mean very broadly, guy selling food on the street. Single-person business to a 10-person business. So over the 2.5 years of this study, roughly 2% of all single-person companies met that threshold of growing to 10 employees or more. That 2% was responsible for 25% of all new jobs in the country.
Wow. So
imagine if by making even a little bit of credit available, we could get that 2% to 3%. A tiny uptick in the success rate by making a little bit of capital available, and we will fundamentally change a country. That's what AI can do, and it does it better. So in Kenya, when implementing this solution that we built, the measured reduction in non-performing loans was 26%. So not only did we make all these loans available, and over 9 million of them now have been originated and paid off, we did it and outperformed FICO by 26%.
Oh, fantastic. Cool. So with your involvement in global discussions on digital currency and trade technology, where do you see these areas heading in the next decade?
Digital currency is inevitable. And again, you to understand this, it's not so much about predicting the future as looking at the past. There are some pretty much, well-defined definitions of what money is, system of account, unit of exchange, and so forth. And if you look at each of the major transformations in money, from barter to specie, like gold or silver, from specie to paper, from paper to cards, and now from cards to digital currencies, each of them basically fundamentally moved the bar on those measures. They did a better job of it.
Sure.
Now, it's easy to fall into the hype curve. At no point has one of these monetary, revolutions completely supplanted the other. Yeah. We still use paper, we still use coin, we still barter, and we always will.
Sure.
Okay, so digital currency is not going to replace cards or coins or notes, but in terms of volume, within the next decade, it will. I'm going to say it will probably account to 80% or more of global monetary transactions by volume within 10 years. And again, I don't have to be some brilliant prophet. I just have to look at the monetary revolutions of the past, and also note that it took millennia to go from barter to specie. It took centuries to go from specie to paper. It took smaller number of centuries go from paper to card. It will probably take decades to go from card to digital.
Interesting. So, okay, your career spans significant achievements and contributions. What advice would you give to professionals aspiring to innovate in the intersection of technology and finance?
I suppose I would give 2 or 3 pieces of advice. One is that invest as much time in cultivating your network as you do in primary value creation in your career. This will hardly come as a surprise to you, Tim. But one of the things that I was resistant and, dare I say, arrogant about when I was younger, and I think it hurt me, is that I thought that I would succeed merely by doing an excellent job. I didn't, in my 20s and early 30s, I didn't put much time or investment in my network, and I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have any people, senior sponsors who were looking after me, because I never, and that's not their fault, it's mine. I never cultivated those relationships.
Sure.
And that, that definitely had an impact on my trajectory. And arrogance is always a hard thing to overcome, because it requires you have to, make some very humbling understandings about yourself. But so that would be one thing. The second thing, in some ways, it's almost the opposite. I think through a lot of my earlier career, I perceived this invisible barrier between myself and what I saw as the cadre of global thought leaders, who are out there writing papers, presenting at conferences. That barrier doesn't exist. When you talk to conference organizers, publishers, and get out there, you realize they're hungry for content.
Sure.
If you want to be, a thought leader, if you want to be speaking, writing papers, you really have to, and I'm sorry to say this, you have to come up with, only, vaguely sensible content, and people are going to scoop it up. So if you want to be, a leader in blockchain, a leader in AI, a leader in quantum computing, there is nothing preventing you from doing a little bit of reading, getting a basic understanding of the tech, and putting yourself out there.
Completely, yeah.
So that would be the other key piece of advice I have.
Thank you so much, Areiel. I've really enjoyed today's podcast. Really educational, one of the most insightful ones I've ever done. Love to do more with you in the future in different areas. And thank you so much, and have a great day, and looking forward to talking to you soon.
You're very welcome, Tim, and thanks again for taking the time to sit down with me.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.